Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of the Golden Years retirement community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show, we'll revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Ike Eisenman and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. Today, we are thrilled to welcome someone who has been a television producer, author of over 20 books, winner of 23 Emmy Awards in writing, and worked for many years for the beloved children's program Sesame Street, which he worked for from 1970 to 2015. Please help us welcome Emily Pearl Kingsley. Emily, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be there.
Okay, I did a lot of research on you, and I could not find one thing. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Forest Hills, Queens, in New York.
Oh.
I'm a born and bred New Yorker.
Oh, same here. So, I'm a Brooklyn boy.
Yeah.
Did you always want to write?
No, I never worked. I never thought about writing. It never entered my mind. I only became a writer because that's the only thing that they had openings for. I interviewed and tried out in all the other venues that I had done anything in. I tried out for production, I tried out for editing, I tried out for research, but they were fully staffed. This is the first year when the show first went on the air, and I fell in love with Sesame Street, and I said, I need to be there in some respect. I don't care what it is. And I tried everything. I went to the Muppets wearing a dress that I had sewn and some dolls, and I said, let me sew the puppets. I would have swept the floor. I'd have done anything. And they told me, it took me about 9 months to get them to hire me because I was such a nuisance. I just, kept calling them every couple of weeks and saying, please let me do something. The only thing they needed was writers. They couldn't find people to write this stuff.
That's amazing to me.
You had to be able to write comedy for 3-year-olds, a 3-minute segment that taught according to their very specific curriculum, and was no more than 3 minutes long, and was funny, and was with their characters, and comprehensible by a 3-year-old. And I had been watching the show twice a day. The last show I was on was canceled, so I was out of work. So I was able to watch the show twice a day for 9 months. And so I really, really got to know the characters, the format, the curriculum. And so my audition pieces turned out to be right on because I'd been studying the show for 9 months. And that was the only thing that they needed. And so that's how I got in. That's how I became a writer. I had never written anything.
We were going to ask you about this down the road, but it's amazing to me that writers are always the ones that are struggling to break in now, and that's what they needed the most. That's incredible.
Absolutely. Well, it was a very specific kind of writing, and the comedy writers is one thing, and educational writers is quite another thing. And this was a real marriage of the two. So it happened to work. Thank goodness. I was blessed that it worked out, and it was a very, very happy environment for 45 years.
Well, I mean, I find it absolutely amazing that you found your way into it, because I know these days when you're, or at least I had some very small experience with working in children's animation, and there's experts and psychologists and educators who are, breathing down your neck and saying, no, not this word, not that word, or, phrase this differently. Did you, and I might be jumping ahead here on Jonathan, sorry about this, but was that part of what you had to work with, or did they even have anybody? I mean, were your instincts just in the right place?
In a way, there was no such thing. We were the only game in town, education, the whole concept that you could use television to educate 3-year-olds, really little kids, was so brand new that And then the experts and the people who, you know, started teaching us stuff sort of grew with us. And we started having seminars every year. We would have educational seminars from children's educators and stuff like that who wanted to have input into the curriculum. The curriculum was a very, very thick document of all of the different things that we were trying to teach. In the beginning, it was kind of simple. We had the letter of the day and the number of the day and, you know, stuff like that. And it grew and grew and grew until we started doing relational concepts, up, down, in, out, far, near, far, you know, that sort of thing. And then emotional things started coming in about feelings and identifying feelings. And the curriculum for the show grew and grew and grew. And as it did, the people, you know, having input in it grew and grew and grew. And but for the curriculum document said on it, the first experimental season of Sesame Street. And later on, it was the 15th experimental season of Sesame Street, or the 25th experimental season of Sesame Street. And in a very real way, you know, we were learning and growing the entire time. You know, there were times when we felt we went either a little overboard or a little in a direction that wasn't as important as some other directions, but we wanted to keep it growing and keep experimenting and keep seeing what the kids were learning from. That's another important thing, is that everything we did was tested on real kids, you know, so we could write a bit or write a segment and show it to kids. And then we'd be told that didn't teach very well. Maybe we should go at it from a different point of view or something like that. There was a wonderful story about a song that Christopher Surf wrote about, it was about mountains, I think it was. So during a season when we were trying to teach about the natural environment. And so he put one of the Muppets in a little Tyrolean outfit with lederhosen and stuff. And he, you know, they sang a song about, yeah, das is a mountain, and a mountain is, you know, and it taught all about mountains. So they showed this bit to a bunch of little kids. Well, first they tested the kids on what they knew about mountains. Then they showed this bit about the song with the mountain song. And then they retested them afterwards. And afterwards, they knew less about mountains than they had known going in. So that song was never used on the show because they figured that it was a wonderful device for sucking information out of the heads of children.
Wow.
They were going to sell it to the State
that's quite
Department.
an accomplishment.
Right. So, but I use this as an example, but you know, that just about everything that we ever wrote was tested on real kids to see whether kids learned from it. And we learned, of course, a great deal about what were the techniques that worked and what didn't.
So this is a huge collaborative effort. Everything that went on was like a whole panel just discussing everything before it got put on the air.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Want to go back a little bit before Sesame Street. You worked on some other shows also that we wanted to talk about.
Oh, I worked on Supermarket Sweep. That's not I went from Supermarket Sweep to John Gielgud. I did a whole lot of interesting things.
So that's where you started out doing script research. I read for like East Side, West Side with George C. Scott.
Yes.
And followed with John Gielgud, Age of Man. I mean, these are like Hollywood legends. I mean, what were those shows about? And can you tell us about them in particular?
Well, East Side, West Side was just such a brilliant show and much, much before its time. It was, George Scott was playing a kind of rough around the edges social worker in the inner city. And he was, each episode, it was like your weekly Law and Order kind of dramas today, that each week dealt with another social condition. And it was very, very, very dark and straightforward. And this was 1963. And they drafted a whole lot of writers who had been previously blacklisted, and they were dealing with a lot of social conditions that all of these blacklisted writers had wanted to write about for a long time. And so the scripts were fabulous. And this was my very first job in television, and I was hired to do research. So I was the person who, the script would come to me and I would authenticate any details that were in it. So how much do apples cost on Rivington Street? You know, and how much would a woman get on welfare if she had 3 children of the following ages, and you know, how much of it was allocated for food and how much for clothing and so on. So I was the one who was supposed to make sure that these scripts were you know, accurate in every detail. It was a fascinating job. But of course, the show was canceled after 23 episodes, because it was the first show, I believe, that had a racially integrated cast. Oh. Either the secretary or the assistant or something in the social worker's office was Cicely Tyson, of all people. Wow. And this was a racially integrated cast, which was unheard of. And there were 7 states in the South that refused to buy the show. And so CBS just simply couldn't afford to continue production, even though it was fabulous and, you know, had every possible production value you can imagine. But it shows up every once in a while now on something called Brilliant But Canceled. And so sometimes you can track down some of these shows. And if they were to go on today, they would be just as relevant and just as up to the minute as they were then. So that was my first introduction to television. It was a fascinating job. Yeah. And that was in Talent Associates, which was the David Susskind operation. And so I stayed on when that show got canceled. They kept me on to work on Supermarket Sweep.
It's quite a pendulum swing there.
Indeed. And in the middle of all of that was the John Gielgud special, Ages of Man. So I really have been from the ridiculous to the sublime several times.
What were they like, Gielgud and George C. Scott?
Oh, Gielgud was fantastic. It was simply he sat on a chair and he decided what he wanted to recite. He knew, I should say, he's passed away. He knew the entire canon. He knew every word of Shakespeare. And he would say, well, now I will do the John of Gaunt speech from John. And I would sit at his feet out of camera range with the book. And he would recite. And then when the speech was over, he would look at me and he would say, well, Emily, I think I had an is instead of an if, and an as instead of an at. And I would say, that's right, Sir John. And he'd say, we'll have to do it again, fellas.
Oh dear, my goodness.
So I don't know how any of these jobs prepared me for any of my later jobs, but you know, they all went in the experience bag. So that was great fun.
Well, you actually also worked with another legend, Dick Cavett. What can
I worked
tell us about that?
My experience with Dick Cavett was also very strange. He was on in the morning, and Dick Cavett, I mean, I love him dearly, but he's something of a snob, and he wanted to interview, his purpose on life was to interview Katharine Hepburn, Marlon Brando, Lunt Fontaine, Laurence Olivier, and that was about it. And everybody else he kind of suffered through. And I actually met him once at a theater, and I reminded him of all of this, and he laughed and he said, well, I guess that's true. But since it was the morning show, this was ABC at the time, and they wanted it to be more accessible to housewives and to women. So they wanted us to do more women topics. So I got flooded with cookbooks and, you know, all kinds of, so I was interviewing the lady guests, you know, and so the woman who cooked with flowers, for example, you know, and would come on the set with her frying pan and a bunch of daffodils and whatnot, and he just he wanted to die. He just, you know, he had absolutely no use for a woman who cooked with flowers. And so every time he ever saw me come into the studio, he would say, "Oh no, what am I going to have to do today?" So we had a segment once where we had two ladies who were talking about how to do gourmet cooking on your sailboat. And, and we actually built a little set that rocked. You know, we put Cavett in a yellow slicker. I thought he was going to kill me. And so he was going to do a cheese souffle on this rocking thing with his yellow raincoat. And I thought he was going to murder me. But anytime he saw me, he knew it was one of these demonstration spots. And not Laurence Olivier by a long shot. So that was my wonderful experience with Cavett.
So right after you had a game show after Cavett. That was right before Sesame Street. You had a game show.
Yes, there was a game show out in California called Everybody's Talking, which was a wonderful game show. And that's the one year in my entire life I lived elsewhere than New York City. And I loved living in Hollywood for that one year. And it was a really fun and very intellectual kind of game show. But that got canceled because of a strike, a cameraman's technician strike. And we couldn't get enough shows in the can to carry over. And so it died, and I came back to New York and started pounding away at Sesame Street.
So you had watched, that's why, getting back to Sesame Street, so you had watched Sesame Street all this time. So already by the time that you were going into it, it was already starting to be well known?
It started in 69, 70, right? And I came back to New York in the very beginning of 70. So it was just coming on the air. And there was a tremendous amount of press and publicity and, you know, this brand new experimental thing that was going to teach children. And so I was home. My show had been canceled. I was out of work. So I had nothing to do but sit around and watch this brand new show that was just coming on the air. And I just fell in love. And I just said, that's where I belong. And I spent the next year, the whole first season, trying to get them to hire me. And so I started in the first week of season 2.
Wow.
Yeah. My gosh. And I now here's where I have to like insert my little story and my experience with Sesame Street. I was in second grade in 1969. And I remember sitting in class and the teacher suddenly makes this grand announcement about some very special thing we were going to get to watch. And then some assistant rolled in a TV back in the days when the TVs were huge and it was on this big tray. We all thought, oh my gosh, we don't have to actually like do our, you know, our cursive handwriting today. We can watch TV. And she did this little introduction. And I think it was something that was definitely part of the rollout marketing material that Sesame Street put everywhere. But they got our school to play the very first episode. And I'm sure this happened all across America. But being, 7 years old, I was too old for the show. But I just thought it was the most amazing thing I had ever seen. So it really impacted me, even though it wasn't, I was too old to, I already, of course, knew and learned the things that were being taught. But it was instantly, and obviously with you too, it was instantly something that even at that ripe age, I could tell was going to be very important and exciting. So that's my little
well, that's
little story.
Exactly what happened to me. And I wasn't 7. And there was a magic. There was a certain kind of sophistication, shall I say, of the humor. And it was not baby stuff, and it was not talking down to kids and treating them like babies. And it was funny. It was damn funny. Yeah.
Well, most certainly. And it seemed like it seemed like, I don't know if this was a conscious effort around this, but there was enough adult humor that if parents have this show rolling, and playing while they're doing something else and the kids are watching, there's still opportunities to get a pretty darn good chuckle out of it, even if you're not a child. But obviously it took off right away. So when did it start becoming, like a major staple program for America?
Well, I'm not sure, but it had a few years kind of all to itself. It didn't appear to other people saying, hey, we can get a piece of this, we can try the same thing, and for a few years. And so we kind of owned the concept for a while. And I think, well, number one, it was just plain good. It was just good. The writing was good. The characters were wonderful. There was it wasn't talking down to the kids. And we learned rather early on, and this was validated later in a study that was done at the University of Kansas, that kids who watched the show with somebody learned 3 times as much as kids who watched alone. And so it became apparent to us, as I say, kind of early, that to make it fun for grown-ups to watch as well was a real boost. I mean, it helped, beside the fact that you were safe leaving your kids in front of the show. They were not going to hear anything, bad or contraindicated, but you could leave them safely in front of the set for this period. But the adults kind of started getting drawn in because the humor was sophisticated and funny. And we then started working in a concentrated way to add in this second layer of humor to engage the parents and the caretakers and so on who would watch with the kids. And then we found out that this was definitely beneficial to the kids as well. So that's why we started doing these hilarious parodies, which obviously the little kids wouldn't know what is the 400 blows, or, what is upstairs, downstairs. But they would learn about upstairs and downstairs. And the grown-ups would get a real chuckle out of it at the same time.
Well, what was
became something so iconic and so special about Sesame Street.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, what were some of the recurring bits when you first got there?
Well, I mean, I got there in the beginning of season 2, so we were also kind of developing some new characters. We had Ernie and Bert, of course, and we had Big Bird and Cookie.
So they were there from the beginning, all of them.
They were there from the beginning, right? But Grover took a little time to kind of develop who was Grover, and was Cookie a monster, or was he, what was the role of monsters? And the whole idea that this two-pronged thing, that you had a street, that this was the brilliance of John Stone, that this was not some kind of a magical clubhouse up in the clouds someplace. This was a real street, an inner city street that inner city kids could relate to, could identify with, could recognize, and feel a little bit at home there. On the one hand. On the other hand, it's a street that's populated with monsters and 8-foot tall yellow birds and things, where people and monsters integrated and related to each other in a very comfortable kind of way. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things that made it so special. Number one, the kids could feel so comfortable there and relate to it. And on the other hand, there was all this crazy stuff going on in this identifiable location. So that appealed to me so very much. But as I say, all of this was being developed, almost on a daily basis. That let's try this, let's try that, and things that we tried that didn't work, got jettisoned and other stuff, got incorporated. And for example, the second season, that's my first season, but the second season, we had input from the Hispanic people, the group, and women, so many of our characters were male. And the women characters, the female characters that we had, I'm not talking about the street characters were fine. I mean, Sonia Manzano came in as Maria in the second season. And that was, a ground changer. I don't know what's the word, but and that was historic. She said she grew up, she never saw anybody on television that looked like her, or occasionally, threw in a Spanish phrase or was busy, cooking some Spanish dish, This was history. This was absolute history. And then, we were trying very hard to develop female characters. And this was a challenge that went on for many years, because some of the female characters, if Ernie and Bert were women, we would get a lot of criticism that we were making women look stupid, and so you get criticism. But if you don't make them look dopey and silly, then they're boring. So it's a kind of a lose-lose situation, and we dealt with that for a long time. Abby Kadabi is a fabulous character. She didn't come in until, I don't know, season 30 something.
Right.
But this was something that we were working on continuously. So the Hispanic input started in season 2, and then it was sort of like a field day for anybody who had an issue that, hey, let's get Sesame Street to deal with. I mean, I literally got a letter from somebody saying, why weren't we addressing the issue of tube-fed babies? What? Wow. Give me a break.
Wow.
Okay, tube-fed babies.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a 3-minute comedy you can write about that.
Maybe. Well, I mean, this is premature in our discussion, but my whole involvement with the disability issue.
Yeah, we're going to ask about. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want me to start with talking about that? Because this is very near and dear to me.
Sure.
So let's see. I started in 1970, and I think it was second season. Yeah, I was brand new. John Stone asked me to check out something called the Little Theater of the Deaf. Mm-hmm. And I went out and watched a couple of shows that they did, and they were fabulous. They were charming. They were funny. They were geared to this very young audience. And the shows that they did were a combination of signing and speaking, so that no matter what the audience was, they would get the same experience. And the integration of signing and speaking at the same time was seamless and just beautiful. So I suggested that we book the Little Theater of the Deaf, and we started using them on the show in season 2. And I became the deaf writer. I mean, I was the writer for this group of performers. And in doing so, I started getting to know them, and I socialized with them, and I learned how to sign. And it was such just an eye-opening experience for me. And I also became a little bit disability conscious, because I was getting to know these people as people and some of the challenges that they were dealing with in their everyday lives. So we booked Linda Bove, who was a deaf actress, as a regular on the street. And I started writing segments, number one, about her particular disability challenges, so that kids could say to her, how do you wake up in the morning if you can't hear your alarm clock? Mm-hmm. how do you know if there's somebody at your front door if you can't hear your doorbell? You know, how do deaf people make these accommodations? So I was already, you know, sort of into this mindset, writing for Linda and writing for the Theater of the Deaf. In 1974, my own son is born with Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, the concept of disability has a whole new meaning to me. The idea of, I mean, first of all, when my son was born, we were given very horrible advice: put him away, send him to an institution. He's never going to walk. He's never going to talk. He'll never know who you are as his parents. He'll never read. He'll never write. Get rid of him. So, you know. P.S. We decided not to do all that stuff, but to take him home and to give him an enriched, stimulating environment and see what we could do. Turns out the kid was bright. He was, you know, he was not only not the kind of vegetable they had predicted, but he was terrific. He was funny. He was, you know, and he started doing letter identification and putting little words together when he was 3. When he was 3. So, and this was amazing. This was breaking all the rules. This was changing everything. And here I am working on Sesame Street. So I go to the producers and I say, listen, I've got a 3-year-old kid who's starting to do our stuff. He's starting to do letter and number identification and reading little words. Can I put him on the show? And they said, sure, let's try it. And what do we got to lose? You know, so we put Jason on the show, and he was so adorable and so cute and so funny, and was doing little words. You know, he would do D, and he was with Cookie Monster, and he'd show him a letter D, and Cookie would say, what's that? Jason would say D, and then he'd say, what does D stand for? And then you open it up, there's a picture. He says, D dog. And Cookie Monster says, and what does the doggy say? And Jason says, woof. And I mean, you could just eat him up. It was just fabulous. So P.S., the mail that we got was absolutely phenomenal. It was just a landslide of letters coming into the office saying all sorts of things. Number one, I have a kid like that, and I never knew that kids like that were capable of doing this sort of thing. I'm going to work harder with my kid. And letters coming in saying, it's just wonderful to see a kid who's a little bit different. We never see kids like ours on television. Well, this absolutely was, I mean, it was like throwing gasoline on me and then lighting a match. I became, you know, I became crazy. So I became the disability spokesperson for Sesame Street. And I believe to this day that this was groundbreaking change in the history of television.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, you know, we started just in 2 different ways. As I say, number one was showing what kids could do. We were showing, and I started not only a lot of kids with Down syndrome, of course, but kids in wheelchairs and kids with crutches and kids with helmets and kids with, you know, cross-eyed, and you name it. We would put them on the show, either showing what they could do or just being there, just being part of the community, just being part of the background with all the other kids, doing all the stuff that the other kids did. And the response was just fabulous. It was absolutely fabulous. So, you know, it's one of the things that I am the most proud of, that we made these, you know, and also we started booking celebrities. There's, you know, you can put on, you know, Johnny Cash and God knows who, you know, everybody on this show. You could put on Itzhak Perlman, and you could put on, and I did Christopher Reeve,
right?
And I did Itzhak Perlman and Andrea Bocelli, and you know, all sorts of people with very visible disabilities. And look, have you ever seen the bit I did with Christopher Reeve?
Yeah, we want to ask about that, because that's like a very famous episode. And I remember at the time watching that. And so how did that come about, that whole thing?
Well, it was, I had met him, and when he was able-bodied, and asked him if he wanted to come on the show. And And he said, that sounds like fun. And then after his accident, you know, we pursued it again. And because I said to him and his people, that I felt it was really important that kids frequently with a parent, you know, they're said, don't stare, don't point, don't ask, don't watch, don't, you know, and as if there's something so frightening about this situation. I said, no, that's not what we want to do with this. We would like the kids to be able to feel free to ask the questions that they have. They're entitled to have answers to their questions. These are very, very legitimate questions. So I put, I presented all of this to Chris Reeve, and he was pleased with that. And so we did two bits with him. One of them, and sadly, they don't feel they can show it anymore because he has died, and they don't really? show bits of people who are died, and which is sad because this is just a historic piece. So he comes down the street in his chair, and there's his, and I said to him, I want to use your son Will in this bit because I think it's important. He said, why do you want to use, we never use our son. I spent a half a day at his house over in Bedford. And I explained to him, people need to know that people with disabilities, even really significant disabilities, have families. They have families who love them, who care for them, and you know, it's just dad. So I said, I want to use your son. They're gonna plan a trip to the library, and so he said, well, let me check with my wife, and I'll call you back. He called me the next day, and he said, it's a go to use Will. We never use Will, but this time we're going to do it. So I wrote this bit where Big Bird and Will and who was it, Zoe, I guess, we're waiting for Will's dad, Chris, to come we're all going to go to the library. And they say, well, where is he? And little Will says, here he is. And Chris comes down the street in this humongous wheelchair with a tracheotomy and tubes and all kinds of stuff. And Big Bird says to him, gee, Chris, you look very different from the last time I saw you. The last time I saw you, you weren't using that chair. And Chris says, well, you see, I had an accident and now my legs don't work and I'm not able to walk, so I need this chair. So they say, you know, well, how do you make your chair go? Do you push it with your arms? Well, he says, my arms don't work either. So I have this little tube, and, you know, and he demonstrates how he makes the chair go. I mean, he answers these really very real, fundamental questions that kids have. And when Will sees him come down the street, he jumps up, he says, here he is. He jumps up into his lap. He gives him a big kiss. He says, hi, Dad. No, I mean, that's gold. That's precious. It's just, hi, Dad. So, I mean, I'm heartbroken that we can't show that piece anymore because it's, you know, it was so much meat in that. And then they go off to the library, and Zoe climbs up in his lap and he gives her a ride in the wheelchair, and it was very upbeat and a lovely, lovely bit. The second bit that I wrote for Chris Reeve had him doing the alphabet with Ernie. It had absolutely nothing to do with the disability whatsoever. It was just, he was just there like any other Muppet, you know. And so I was very pleased with both of those, and I'm really very sad that
that is a shame. That's absolutely a shame that it's not being able to get played.
Right.
Well, what was the first skit when you started working, what was the first skit that you actually got on the air of yours?
Well, the funny thing is that those two audition pieces that I wrote for them went on the air just as they were. And you can imagine the thrill that one of them was an Ernie and Bert bit, and was a quiet and loud bit. And the thrill of walking on that set, first of all, I still, if I go on the set, I still get the same thrill and the same goose pimples walking on it today, all these years later, that I got on the very first day. But if you can imagine that, hearing the very first words you've ever written in your whole life performed by Jim Henson and Frank Oz, it was just mind-boggling.
Oh my
I'll
gosh.
never forget the thrill, the thrill.
Well, you brought me back around because I said we would be remiss if we didn't ask about what it was like working with those two legends. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Well, they besides the fact that they were utter true geniuses, they were very, very funny. And so long as they had the puppets on, they were always in character. So if the puppets were on their hands, they were Ernie and Bert. They were not Jim and Frank. They, you know, so and so they bantered with each other as Ernie and Bert, you know, in the interstitials in between takes. It was very, very funny.
That's awesome.
And Frank was the greatest improviser I've ever seen in my life. But the way he worked with children was just unbelievable. And it was really fun to see. So long as there was a puppet, a child would be relating to the puppet. It didn't matter that there was a whole person underneath lying on the floor. You know, so long as there was a puppet there, the puppet was engaging and the child was engaged with the puppet. It was astonishing. And Frank was just amazing. He could go on with kids on and on and on, and so funny, so funny.
That's great.
Yeah.
When did it go from you having to like pitch ideas to like you just whatever you wanted was going to get on?
Oh no, it never was that way.
Never?
It never was that way. I tell you that writer's block is a real thing, and there are so many times we would have regular writers meetings, and we were a very congenial and wonderful group who helped each other a lot. And there were many, many times when I just said, there is not another idea. There's not another new idea in the universe that hasn't been thought of. I'm absolutely, you know, and this was all still kind of new for me. But everybody was just so collaborative and helping each other. And, you know, we're not leaving this room till Emily has a good idea to work on. It was just marvelous. And in fact, the old batch of writers that we worked on in those early years still get together every Tuesday afternoon, and we have a little Zoom meeting together as a group. We're like a little family, and we love each other very much. And
oh gosh, I mean, how enviable!
After all these years, we still get together once a week.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Well, what was the atmosphere like on the set, and who were you closest to?
Oh, it was a huge family, and everybody loved everybody. I never saw, I never saw an angry interchange. I never heard raised voices. I never heard, there was one time only that I had a real head-to-head with the head writer about the last line of a disability bit, which I thought was a mistake and trivialized the disability situation. And I really went to the wall on that one. And I mean, I was not in a position to insist. A head writer could always override you. But I was, that was a situation, that's the only situation I can remember where I really had a very, very important difference of viewpoint on something like that. But it was a joy. It was an absolute joy. Wow.
Well, you guys produce like an incredible amount of content. How long did a show take to actually tape, and how far in advance did you do them to have so many ready?
Sometimes it would take a whole day to do a show, sometimes, the show in the beginning, a lot of changes were made. When we started, it was an hour-long show. One of the realities of life is funding, clearly, and in the beginning, we had federal funding. I don't even know where all the funding came from, but we were doing a year's worth of shows let's see. We were doing 6 months worth of hour-long shows, and then the 6 months of shows would be repeated once. So and it's 5 days a week.
Mhm.
So that's a lot of shows. We would, each writer, you would get an assignment sheet. You would contract with them for how many shows you wanted to write in a particular season. So if there were 120 shows in a season, and you'd say, well, I'll do 10, and there were several other writers. So you would be assigned a show, and that would be your responsibility. And you'd get an assignment sheet that would tell you what are the things that you're supposed to teach in that show. And the concept was the curriculum department had spaced out this very, very thick document, which was the curriculum document, and all the things that you were supposed to teach in a season. And presumably, if all the things that everybody was assigned to teach, they did teach, then by the end of the year, the kid would have been exposed to everything in that document. So, I mean, that's wishful thinking in a way, because sometimes, some of the curriculum goals wouldn't get covered as much as you would have liked, or whatever. But for example, you would be assigned the letter W, and so you're supposed to write for the letter W in your show. So sometimes you just couldn't think of anything for the letter W. So you would go into the writers' meeting and say, listen, I have W and I can't think of anything, but I did think of something nice for the letter R. Anybody want to switch with me? And somebody would say, well, I'll take your W. And so, sometimes it would work out that way, or somebody would say, well, here, maybe you want to do this for W, and, you'd take their idea or something.
You're praying you don't get X.
X was fun. X marks the spot.
There you go.
So you would have maybe 8 different segments separated by existing animation bits, live action bits, or Muppet bits. So you would get a chance to write the street bits, with the street cast, Ernie, Maria and Susan and Gordon and the people on the street, the live people on the street. And they would be separated by a certain amount of interstitial space, which would be filled with inserts, with either animation or live action stuff, or Muppet bits. And you might get an opportunity to write a Muppet bit or two, to go in there as well, which is always the most fun. Right. So then with the research that was being done, they would find that if you were away from the street, let's say you started a street story in the beginning of the show, then you had a few inserts, and then you came back to the street story. And then you had a few more inserts, and then you came back to the street. They found that sometimes the kids had a hard time connecting the story. They couldn't carry the story over the insert pieces and pick up the story. So then we tried a certain number of seasons where we would do the story all together, all in a big lump, instead of breaking it up. But then you'd have a whole bunch of the show with nothing but inserts left. And, so there was a lot of, twisting and turning and trying to figure out what was the most effective and what was the stuff that the kids learned the best from. So
there are a couple of episodes in particular that I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
They were just like famous episodes. One of them was when Will Lee died, Mr.
Yeah.
Hooper.
Mm-hmm.
What was the discussion like back then? I mean, what was going on behind the scenes to broadcast out to kids?
Well, that was one, in a similar way to my disability thing. We realized that kids had questions, and kids had, we couldn't justify just having him disappear. Mm-hmm. And everybody was emotionally connected with him. I mean, we loved him, and he had been there for years. And it just didn't, what we're going to say, he moved to California, it just didn't, it didn't seem honest, and it didn't seem fair to the kids. And it was a huge leap, but it really worked. It's one of the things that is so often remembered, that the kids were entitled to have, not that there are any answers when somebody dies, but we dealt with it the best we could, and there were a lot of tears on the set that day, and they were very, very genuine, and I think the emotion of that experience is one of the reasons it's so memorable.
Because that was in the news even at the time. I was already much older and I remember going to watch that episode because wanted to see, it was all over the place.
There was a one that was a lot more recent that got a lot of press that was not justified, and it was really ridiculous. I wrote a song, which I did a takeoff on a song from Porgy and Bess, of all things. Not that too many of our audience is that familiar with Porgy. I'm familiar with Porgy and Bess. But I wrote a song about the idea that there are some foods that are once in a while foods, and other time foods that you can eat all the time. It's like, and it was based on the song "A Woman Is a Sometime Thing" from Porgy and Bess. So I wrote the song called "A Cookie Is a Sometime Food." Right, and there's Cookie, and he's surrounded by all these fruits and vegetables and but a cookie is a one-time, cookie is a sometime food, and then there was another show right smack after that where Cookie Monster goes into the store and he asks for a cookie, of course. And they say, well, the cookies are in the oven. They're not finished yet. But in the meantime, why don't you try this carrot? And so he tries the carrot and he says, oh, it's not a cookie, but it's not bad. It's okay. It's not a cookie, but well, the next day, don't you think that the newspapers were all full of, he's not a Cookie Monster anymore. He's a veggie. I
did see that. I saw that in the news.
Which is a massive, misunderstanding. But it got a huge amount of publicity that he was turning into a veggie monster. No, the idea is, it's not a cookie, but it's not so bad.
Well, the other episode was the Snuffleupagus episode.
Oh yeah, now that's interesting, very interesting. They were doing this business about Snuffy being an imaginary friend. Right. Where that is, the live characters thought he was an imaginary friend just because he kept turning the corner and going away before anybody got to see him. And for some time, we were thinking up all kinds of devices to, he walked behind a bush, or, he would, there were all kinds of ways for people not quite to see him. And then, and poor Big Bird was saying, but he is real. He's my friend. And, and we realized overnight, believe it or not, that this is a case of sexual abuse, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. That when a kid comes to you and tells you something that is very serious, that's on his mind, you do not say to him, oh, you have a terrible imagination. You have such a big imagination. It's all in your mind. Mm. You better take this child seriously and listen to him. Because if he has something to say to you that is very serious and right. very important, you don't poo-poo it and say it's, it's just all in his imagination. And so we changed the Snuffleupagus theme overnight and spent the next 3 months apologizing to Big Bird for not having taken him seriously, because we realize how dangerous that can be. Mm. If a child, that was a real mistake. That was a real serious mistake when we were doing all that stuff.
Yeah, who thinks of it at the time, right? Of course.
Yeah.
Right. And you getting back to your son Jason, you had a groundbreaking show. This Is My Son. What can you tell us about that show and how did it come about?
This Is My Son was a show that was written about Jason when he was very, very little. The real groundbreaker was the movie that I did with Alan Sloan with Tyne Daly and Richard Crenna, which was called Kids Like These, which was really basically my story about, raising a child with a disability. And it took it from the beginning scene of the movie was in the delivery room. We had to cast a newborn. And that was in 1987. That was a terrific movie. And it was on a couple of times. And then unfortunately, the production company that had produced the movie went out of business and it never got made as a commercial product, because I watched it recently and it holds up. It really it stands up. It's I think the most honest and complete story of what it's like to have a child like this emotionally. And Tyne Daly was she was incredible. She was fabulous. And I wrote that with my collaborator at the time, Alan Sloan. And we wrote that movie and we decided we had to use five children with Down syndrome, representing the child growing up from birth up to about age 9. That's where I took it to. And CBS said, well, you can't find actors with Down syndrome or children. We'll use regular children and put fancy makeup on them or something. I said, no. That's not the idea. We're going to find real children and show what they can do. The last 3 kids of the 5 had to learn dialogue and had to take direction. So, and so I said to them, I'll get you the kids. I didn't know what I was saying. Those were the days there was no computer, there was no internet, there were no, so I just sent out a mailing to all of the Down syndrome parent groups around the country. And I said, send me videotapes of your kids. And I literally cast 5 kids who resembled each other growing up, it's different ages growing up. And I actually did 5 understudy kids who resembled each other, who were able to learn dialogue and all that stuff. And the newborn, it opens up in the delivery room where she has this baby, and the doctor whigs the baby away and doesn't let her see him, and all the stuff that happened to me. So, CBS said, well, how are you going to do that? So I actually found a woman who had an amniocentesis and knew she was going to have a baby with Down syndrome, was born around the time we were shooting this movie.
Wow. And
she agreed to have the newborn baby be the newborn in my movie. And I actually have even found an understudy. So
oh, good grief.
Oh, it's fascinating. And the movie is really excellent. I think you sometimes it shows up on YouTube or something. It's called Kids Like These. It's just wonderful. It's just wonderful. And I wish it had, I wish it had a better career than it did, but it just didn't have the financial backing that it needed. So that was a wonderful, wonderful movie. So.
Well, you have won 23 Emmy Awards, which is beyond amazing.
Well, that's for the group. That's for the writing group. That's not just me. That's not just me. So.
Well, when did you get your first, and what was it for?
The first one was for that first season. I was in the second season. They started getting Emmys almost every year. They got Emmys a lot. And if they didn't get Emmys, they got nominations. And then somebody else won. So we were nominated almost every year. The funny thing is that after I left and after I retired, I got another Emmy Award after I was already gone. There was one of my shows. They give out Emmys according to the year that it airs. So apparently there was one of my shows that was sitting around or something like that. And they saved it, aired it after I was already gone. And that happened to be in the group that was nominated. So one day the doorbell rang, this big box, and I was already gone for a couple of years, and it's another Emmy award. It's very funny.
My
Oh, just one of these, right?
But it was a great, it was wonderful to be recognized, and so I'm very proud of that.
Well, we talk about the term going viral. Before it even came into existence, you had one of your works go viral, the Welcome to Holland, the essay. Tell us about that and how that work has become so enduring.
Welcome to Holland is a piece that I just spoke it one day. I was counseling a new family that had just had a baby with Down syndrome. And I was sitting on the bedside of this woman in the hospital and telling her what it was going to be like. And we did lots and lots and lots of those, after our experience where we had been told such terrible stuff, and it turned out to be so different. And this kid was so bright and so accomplished, and it's a disability. There's no way around it. It's definitely a disability, but it's not the, nightmare that had been predicted. So I was telling this new mom what it was going to be like. And when I got home, I said, gee, that wasn't half bad. I think I'll write that down. So I wrote it down, and it was right around the time I was doing that movie, Kids Like These. So we worked it in, and it became the final scene of the movie. And then it just went all over the world. It's, I have it in a couple of dozen languages. I have 3 shelves of books upstairs in my library where it's been reprinted in books and in pamphlets. You can get it in aprons and dish towels and refrigerator magnets, and it's been set to music 6 times. It's just, anybody in the disability community knows it. And do you want me to tell you what it is? The idea of Welcome to Holland is that you tell people that when you're going to have a baby, you're expecting to have a baby. It's sort of like you're planning a trip to Italy, and you're very excited, and you're going to do all these things in Italy, and you get your brochures and your plans, and you learn a few phrases at Berlitz, and you're going to see the Michelangelo David, and you're going to ride in a gondola in Italy and in Venice, and go to the Vatican and so on. So the day comes, and the plane leaves, and the plane lands, and the flight attendant comes in and says to you, welcome to Holland. And you say, Holland? What are you talking about, Holland? I'm supposed to be in Italy. I've signed up for Italy, and all my life I've planned to go to Italy. What do you do in Holland? And well, the point is they've taken you to a different place. It's not a disgusting, horrible, awful place with pestilence and plague, and it's just different. It's a little less flashy than Italy. It's a little slower paced than Italy. But once you're there, you have to go out and buy a whole new bunch of books. You meet a whole bunch of new people. You learn some more phrases. And after a while, when you calm down and you catch your breath, you realize that Holland has windmills and Holland has tulips. You even run into a Rembrandt once in a while. But everybody is busy coming and going from Italy. And they're all bragging about what a great time they had there. And for the rest of your life, you will say, yep, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned. And the pain of the loss of that dream never, ever, 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 ever goes away. That's always with you. But if you're so hung up and you're mourning the fact that you didn't get to Italy, you may not be available to enjoy the different and rather special things there are about Holland. So that's what it is. And it works for many, many people. It has helped many, many hundreds of people to understand what this experience is like. It's, it's not the best thing that ever happened to you, but it's not the worst thing that ever happened to you either.
What is Jason up to now?
Jason is so cute. He's I'm gonna give me one second. I'm gonna show you a picture of Jason.
Of course.
Can you see this okay?
Now we can. Yes, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
All right,
Oh my
Jason is
goodness.
47. He's 47 years old. He's very smart. He has written a book called Count Us In, Growing Up with Down Syndrome, which he wrote when he was 19 with his buddy Mitchell Levitz, who is also with Down syndrome. And it's still in print, is used in universities and for course material. It's a terrific book. It's, I think, the only book written by people with Down syndrome in their own words that has not been cosmetically, fixed up for syntax and stuff like that. It's very quirky and it's very adorable. The reason for the beard, when the movie Frozen came out, he's a big Disney fan. He loves movies. He loves musicals. He loves classical music. He loves Broadway shows, and he loves Disney. And he saw this movie Frozen, and he fell madly in love with Elsa, the ice queen from Frozen. And somebody told him he thinks, you say to him, she's a fictional character. And he says, yes, I know, but she's real enough for me. He says, she's beautiful, she's perfect, and she can't break my heart.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he's very, very sharp. And so he loves all things Norwegian because he figures that she's living there somewhere waiting for him. And he wants to go there and live happily ever after watching the Northern Lights together. And so somebody told him that men in Norway wear beards. So that's why he has this great big lovely beard. He's very cute. He's very funny. He's very funny. He's the problem with him, he's my kind of kid, so he's full of all kinds of esoterica and he knows all of Gilbert and Sullivan, and he knows all Broadway shows, and he'll get into the car and he says, oh Mom, that's the Baroque period, and I think it's Vivaldi. He was right, goddammit. So, but he, most of his peers don't know what the hell he's talking about. But he lives in a little group home not far from me with two wonderful roommates. And the three of them, they call themselves the Three Musketeers. And they love watching movies together and doing jigsaw puzzles together and so on. He was working until COVID. He was working in a mailroom at a large agency in White Plains. And so he's been out of work while the office was closed, and we're just eager for him to get back to work. So,
do you still keep up with Sesame Street now? Do you still watch it now that you're retired?
Not much.
Okay.
There've been major changes. I don't really want to go into that too much, but there've been very, very significant changes, and the old folks who are with the beginning and are not too thrilled with some of the things that
that's a shame.
Have been there are a lot of changes.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel a tremendous loyalty and
Sure.
An identity to the show for sure. I wear a watch that has Elmo on it.
There you go.
It's a huge part of my identity and my loyalty, as I say. I haven't been watching it very much recently, but I think I always want to be associated with it for sure.
Do you ever revisit any of the episodes you were involved with?
I try to, you can get them all, I think, there's some kind of an archive on YouTube or something like that, where you can actually access just about all of them, I think. And I have a couple of, what are they, DVDs? I said CDs, something like that, with some of my favorite segments on it, and it's fun to look at those sometimes. And I love to do public speaking. I mean, you can see that I enjoy just talking about this stuff very much. And I'll sit down and talk to anybody at any time. I'd love to go to universities and stuff like that and talk about all of this stuff.
That's on your website, so people can reach out to you for
Yes,
public
for
speaking?
sure. Mhm.
Well, we're going to include that on the video as well.
Right.
Well,
People write to me frequently, several times a week. I get requests to reprint Welcome to Holland. And that's always fine with me, so long as they do it correctly. There have
Sure.
been people who have messed with it, and there have been people, there were people, oh, here's an interesting thing. I don't know how much time we have, but just going on and on. When I was so involved in doing the disability stuff for Sesame, and I said to them, let me do some stuff on autism. And they said, oh, at the time that I was asking them to do this, they said, no, well, it's an invisible disability and you can't really see it. And I said, well, I know how to see it. I know how to portray it. I'll do it. And they said, well, and also, after all, how many people even have that? Now almost everybody has it. And, so they didn't let me do anything on autism. I did wonderful stuff on service dogs. That was really fun. Oh my God, that was that was a real experience. Anyway, and shortly after I retired, they came out with this character who has autism, and they've been doing a lot of autism material, and it's fine. They're doing a really very nice job with it. I just felt sad that I didn't get to do it.
To put this way.
I would have liked to have
do fans still reach out to you a lot?
Oh yes, absolutely. Getting back to Welcome to Holland, when autism became much more prevalent and so many more people were dealing with it, there were people in the autism community who felt that Welcome to Holland was too sunny. And, even though I kept emphasizing the pain of the loss of the dream, so there were people who were writing things like, Welcome to Bangladesh. That's the thing. If you go online, you can find Welcome to Bangladesh. You can find one called Holland Schmalland, because they were dealing with something that was much more intractable and something that was much more difficult and not as resistant to education and stimulation and so on. So they wanted to have something out there that made it much more pessimistic and difficult to deal with. And so now when people ask me if they can reprint Welcome to Holland, I say, sure, absolutely, but you must promise me that you won't change anything. You'll do it the way I wrote it. Because there were people who were trying to leave out the pain part. People were putting religion into it. This is what God intended for you. So now then, I give permission all the time, several times a week, but I make them promise me that they'll do it the way I wrote it without changing anything.
Well, Emily, this has been such a treat to get to talk to you. Such a pleasure. Before we let you go, I do have one question. I mean, what the heck is up with Bert and his pigeons and the love of pigeons? I have to ask.
That's Bert. That's Bert. I was thinking about that today. I wrote a whole show about Bert and his pigeons once, where it was about bird identification. There was a certain kind of pigeon he'd never seen, and I dealt with the Cornell Ornithology Center about how you can tell different birds by their call, and we were doing a chickadee call and a robin call and so on, and finally he gets to see this pigeon that he had never seen before, and we brought in 1 million of them. The studio was filled with them. It was very funny. It was very funny. But look, I mean, Bert, he loves pigeons. He loves bottle caps. He loves paper clips. And look at Oscar. Oscar loves trash. I mean, everybody's entitled. You're entitled to love what you love.
Well, no, but again, seriously, it's an absolute pleasure to get to talk to you. Thank you so much. And I want to thank We have a mutual friend, Leslie Kimmelman, who set this up. So thank you to
Leslie.
I
love
as well.
Leslie Kimmelman.
Yes.
Leslie Kimmelman and her wonderful husband, who's a big member of my Gilbert and Sullivan singing group.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes, I have a wonderful. That's why Jason can sing a lot of Gilbert and Sullivan to you. And
I should have made you sing Modern General.
yeah, right. So anyway,
No, but
I
thank you
did
again.
6 songs for Sesame Street with Gilbert and Sullivan. That, you know, they built 2 Muppets.
fantastic.
They built a Gilbert Muppet and a Sullivan Muppet. It was very cute. Anyway, this has been a real joy. This has been fun to reminisce.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Grew up watching Sesame Street. And to get to speak to you who worked behind the scenes was just an absolute treat.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity, and let me know when you.
We absolutely will.
when
I'll
and
email
how
you
it's
when it's
available.
about to appear. And I'll close it out. But again, this has been Pop Culture Retro. I'm Jonathan Rosen with Ike Eisenman, and we thank our guest, Emily Kingsley, and please subscribe.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast.